Hello, and welcome to Batavia Academy's Learn RxJS training. This course covers how to perform the event reducer pattern with RxJS's observables. Specifically, we are going to only show the card number error if the user blurs the card number input. As I type, there is no error. However, once I blur, an error is shown. At that point, an error will be shown as long as the card is invalid. We'll also make the input red by adding an isError class when we should show that there's an error. All right, so let's talk about how to solve this problem. And this problem is a little bit tricky compared to some of the other ones that we've faced. So I'm going to walk through its setup a little bit more. The primary goal is to conditionally show this div if the user has blurred the input or not, and the card is in error. So what we really need is an observable to control this. That observable is going to be called this.showCardError. And it's going to need to derive from two sources of information. The first is going to be the card error, which we have here, and another is going to be this, whether this input has been blurred or not. We'll talk about that observable in a moment. But this showCardError is going to be derived from a function called showOnlyWhenBlurredOnce. And this is going to be passed the card error. And that observable that we talked about, which is if the card number has been blurred. So there'll be another observable we'll create later, user card number blurred. So this will emit true anytime this input here is blurred. So most of what we'll be doing is actually implementing this showOnlyWhenBlurredOnce method. That'll go up here. That will take a error observable and a blurred observable. And this will combine these two observables and return a value. So this is most of the high-level technical requirements needed to solve this problem. Let's talk about what you need to know to actually solve it. To solve this problem, the most important thing you need to know is the event reducer pattern. On a high level, it involves taking observables that emit values, turning those into observables that emit events, combining all of those events into a single stream, and then as events are produced, updating a stateful object. This pattern can solve a wide variety of problems. What we're going to do is solve a very simple problem, taking a first observable that emits first names and a last observable that emits last names, and combining those into a full name observable that emits the first and last name as one string. So let's see how to do that. Here I've created a first observable that will emit Justin right away, and then a second later it'll emit Ramya. I've represented those values being published like this down here. Here's Justin, then it emits Ramya. I also created a last that after a half second will emit Shaw, and then a second later emit Ramya. So here emit Meyer. Here I've shown what that looks like. So now I have these two observables, I need to combine them. I can't combine them right away because I wouldn't be able to tell if it was a first name or a last name because they'd just be strings. So this is where promoting observable values to observable events comes in handy. Here I am taking the first observable and mapping it to a first event observable. And events really just have some type of identification to let you know what type of event it is. In this case, it's the type property, and it's going to be first, and then I'm going to have the value be whatever the first value was. And I'm going to do the same thing with last. So at the end of this, there's going to be a first event that's going to emit type first value Justin, and then a little bit later, type first value Ramya. And last is going to event type last value Shaw, and then a little bit later, type last value Meyer. Now, once I have these two observables that are event observables, I can combine those into a single stream. And I'll use the merge function to do that. Merge is not an operator, it is a function. It takes two observables. I think it can take an array of observables as well. And it emits or returns a new observable that will emit values that are emitted in the source observables. So here, merge is now going to emit type first value Justin, then the last Shaw, then the first Ramya, then the last Meyer. And then once you have events coming, an observable emitting events, you can reduce these to manage a stateful object. The next example will show how to reduce these events with the scan operator. Scan takes two arguments, a function to do the reduce, and just like the array reduce method in JavaScript, it takes another argument, which is the initial state. Reduce takes kind of the seed value. In this case, scan takes the initial state, which I'm just going to say is an empty string for first and last. Now, every time merged is going to emit a value, this function is going to be called with the previous state and the event that was emitted by merged. And what we do is based on the event type, whether it was first or last, we update the corresponding property, but we leave in all the other state. So we're like, if it was a first event, we're going to overwrite first, but leave last, and vice versa if it was the last event. So with all of this, emit that type first value Justin event, we're going to see that that's the first, the type is first, and we're going to update the stateful object. We're really going to return a new stateful object every time. And it's going to have first as Justin, because we're updating it, and leave last at whatever it was. And then when a last Shaw comes in, we're going to have a new state, which is first Justin, last Shaw. And the state object is going to publish these event objects that look like this, or these state objects that look like this. So we don't want a first and last state object. We want those to be combined into a single string. Well, we already know how to do that. We can use map. So the final thing is we can just take the state, pipe that through a map operator that combines the first and last and get the strings that we want. So if we see this all together, we can just verify that it works, which is always good. One final note about this example, it could have been derived more easily from the RxJS combine operator, but we used it here. We use scan because it's very simple, about as simple problem to solve as possible. And you're going to need the reducer or scan to solve the show only when blurred once function's transformations that it does. There are a few other things you need to know to solve this problem. The first is that user card number blurred should be a subject instead of a behavior subject. A subject is just like a behavior subject, except it doesn't publish its last emitted value for all new subscribers. Behavior subjects are good when you want to retain some state, but we don't need to retain state. We just want to signal that a blur has happened here and now. User card number and user card number blurred will be pretty similar otherwise. We'll want to listen to blur on the input and call next with true. The next thing that you need to know how to do is add a isErr class name to the input when we should show that the input is red because we're showing that the user there is an error. Angular has this fancy way of adding a class name to an element. So this would add the my class name to this input if test value was true. We want the class name to be isAir, and we want it to show up when show card error is true. Show card error is an observable, so you'll want to make sure to read the value using the async pipe. The other thing that we want to conditionally show is the error message, and Angular has a very similar way of doing that, where it has this ngIf directive that will conditionally show this div if expression is true. This expression should be just like the isAir expression and should basically be reading if the show card error observable is true. Again, you'll want to use async pipe. So that's it. That's all you need to know to solve this exercise. This is a hard one, so it's worth taking some time to try to figure it out. If you have to, take a little peek at the solution. Otherwise, I'm going to solve it now. All right, so let's try to solve it. The first thing I'm going to do is get my inputs to work and to line up. And the input is going to be the user card number blurred. And I need to create one. And as we talked about, that's going to be a subject. And I'll tell TypeScript I want that always to be a Boolean. I haven't imported subject yet, so I'll make sure I do that. Now that I have my input observable, I need to write to it. So I'm going to go up here, and on blur, I'm going to call the user card number blurred's next function to emit a true. Now that I have user card number blurred emitting true, I've got all my inputs. Now I want to focus on the outputs. I actually want to use show card error the way it's going to be used, even though it's not working yet. So the first thing I'll do is make the class name work. So it's class is error. And then it's going to be, I'm going to read from show card error its value. And if that emits a true, we will add this isAir. I'm also going to need to conditionally show this div. I'll use the ngIf directive. And ngIf, I want to show this div if show card error is true. So now, if I've done everything right, I've wired up my input of source observables and the output observables. Now I've just got to implement, and this is the hard part, this show only when blurred once. So for show only when blurred once, the first thing I need to do is take these value observables and turn them into event observables. And I'm going to use map for that. So I'm going to take the error observable and turn that into error events observable. And I'm going to map this, map those error values to an object, an event type object. And the type will be, if there is an error, the type will be invalid. If there's not an error, it will be valid. I'm going to do the same thing and make a blurred events using this blurred observable. I'm actually just going to kind of copy this code here. For this case, we're going to get blurred, or is blurred. And I'm going to return if it's blurred, this is going to be a blurred event. Otherwise, it's going to be a focused event. Focus will never happen because this will never be false. But in case maybe I change it so on a false, it actually was focused, I can save that for the future if I want. Now that I have these two events, I need to merge them. So I'm going to make a events observable. That is a collection of all events. That's going to be the result of calling merge with error events and blurred events. I need to make sure I import this because merge is not passed to pipe. That means that it's one of these static imports. Now that I have all my events, the final thing left to do is to do the event reducer. So I'm going to make a state observable that is going to be the result of taking events, piping it through the scan operator. Now scan takes two arguments. The first is going to be a function that takes the previous state and the event, and then returns a new state, and also the initial state. So this is where you really have to think, like, what is the state that I have to keep track of? And what I need to keep track of, the primary thing I need to keep track of is a show card error. And the initial state for that will be false. But in order to derive this, I need two other values I need to remember, which is if we've been blurred, has been blurred, I'll call that false, and a is valid, whether the card is valid or not, and that'll default to false. So this is the state that I'm going to maintain, and it's this function's job that whenever there's an event, it's going to update the previous state object that will look like this. So here we need that switch statement, and I'm going to switch off the event type, and I'm going to write out my cases first. So the first case is going to be if we're valid. Do another case for if we're invalid, and another case if we become blurred. So let's do these one at a time. So if the card is valid, we're going to copy the previous state, but we want to update some of these properties. If the card is valid, that means is valid will be true. And if we should show the card error, well, we shouldn't, no matter what, if it's valid. So that'll always be false. Now let's do invalid. Is valid will always be false. But what about show card error? Show card error actually depends on the previous state. We should show the card error if we have blurred the input. So here, if previous has been blurred and we're invalid now because we just got an invalid event, then we should show the card error. So if we've been blurred and we're now invalid, show the card error. And blurred is going to be pretty similar. Of course, blurred is not going to check set is valid. It's going to set has been blurred to true. And if we should show the card is really if we are invalid. So if we are invalid and we just blurred, we will show the card. So now we're almost there. We have the state object, but we don't want a state object. We just want the has been blurred value. So the final thing is to take the state object, map that to take that state object and just essentially read out its has or show card error value. So state.showCardError. And that's it. If I did everything right, cross your fingers. Oh, I have an error. I already know what it is. It's I forgot to import scan. So let's add the scan operator. Let's run again. I might have a syntax error. I do have a syntax error. This map here should be another parenthesis. Let's run it one more time. I probably have the same thing one more time. We're getting so close. Need an extra parenthesis, extra parenthesis. Let's run it. All right, let's see. Moment of truth. 111, 222. I'm gonna blur. Hey, 333. Let's see if it works when we hit 16. Hey, it works. And every time now, if we make any changes and it's wrong, it lets us know. Whew. All right. Hopefully you got this working and it makes sense. See you at the next exercise.